Good morning and welcome back to Productronica. This is Eric Miskell with EMSNOW. I'm here on the show floor with a very interesting colleague who I've known for several years now, had Dieter Weiss with in4ma. Dieter, just by way of introduction, is the kind of the preeminent market research source for the EMS industry in Europe. If you're not familiar with him, you should be familiar with him. Dieter just gave a speech this morning providing an update on the changing paradigm for the EMS industry in Europe. Your numbers are well researched, they're well founded, and they in many ways paint a picture different than what people hear from other sources in other parts of the world about what's going on with EMS, specifically Europe. Your focus is only on Europe. So first of all, thank you for coming and joining with us. We have some time here, so I'd like to go over quite a few issues with you. Market research I always think about in terms of process and content. So maybe we start the process first and then we can talk about the content, what you get out of it.
Yes.
From a process perspective, you research the data about this industry, and it is constantly evolving and growing. Maybe describe for the audience kind of what it is you do exactly, because that just really speaks to the credibility of the research that you produce.
Yes, thanks, Eric. What I do is I, first of all, create a database of EMS manufacturers in Europe, and I count every legal entity separately. Because that is the way you find the data in the company registers. And I started many years ago with a list of 1,300 EMS manufacturers, and since then I have developed this list much further. And I'm using trade shows like this one over here to see am I missing a company. I use the technical magazines. I look all of them up, whether there is advertisements or information about new EMS companies, and I use the internet for sure to research that. And so as of today, I have 1,943 different legal entities, EMS companies, which some of them not only do EMS, some have a certain part of their revenues as OEM as well. They have own products, but most of them are pure EMS manufacturers. And on top, I work together with the country electronic associations. And in actual fact, when I mentioned that I have 1,943 companies in my database at the moment, this is not the end. I just received a list of 488 EMS manufacturers, which are called in France sous-traitants électroniques, from the French Electronics Association, SNESE, who are supporting my work. And I only in the past had 191 companies in my list, and now I'm updating this, which takes a lot of time because I need to control whether they are a real EMS or whether they just call themselves EMS and in reality are OEMs. Mm-hmm. So I need to check their numbers, but I need to check as well their home pages and see what they are doing. In some instances, I even go and visit the company and let them show me their production. If we are talking about, for example, 3-digit million euro in revenues.
And by way of definition too, you're defining EMS it has to do PCBA. Is that correct?
Exactly. If we have, for example, a manufacturer of electrical cabinets, that is electrical manufacturing services, similar to cable harnesses, that's as well electrical manufacturers. Even so, that is shortcut EMS as well. It's not what I'm counting. I'm only counting companies which manufacture or assemble printed circuit boards, manufacture PCBAs. If they have box building on top, if they have in the front end engineering as well, fine. But for example, if it's just an engineering office or a sales office in the country, I don't count it. Yeah, it's not existing for me. I only count manufacturer. Yeah, see, my company in4ma is it's a shortcut of information for manufacturers and not information for salespeople.
Yeah, exactly right. Good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. So now, and your numbers, just you say the number that you have, the 1946?
43.
43. But at the beginning even of this week, that was less. You told me that just walking the hall, you found another one this morning?
Oh, yes. I arrived over here in Munich on Monday evening, and the first thing I did, I went up to the main hall over here at Productronica, because all the technical magazines were already lying there. And I picked all the technical magazines, and at night at the hotel I was just checking where there were any advertisements of EMS companies. And in actual fact, in a Czech magazine, technical magazine about the electronics industry, I found 2 advertisements of small companies in Czechia who do PCB assembly, which I hadn't known in my database. And I immediately looked them up in the Czech company register, and one company was doing 0.9 million with 25 people, and the other one was doing 1.7 million in revenues with 40 people. Yeah, so they are small. So it's I'm not missing the Foxcons, the J-Bills and so, but the smalls you constantly need to check, and I don't want to forget them. So I'm adding them.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, the French list, I'm checking this list at the moment. I am pretty sure it might end up to more than 350, 360 EMS in France. Yeah? France is still a solid EMS base, and it will lead to a total number of EMS companies in Europe of about 2,065 to 2,070 companies. That's a lot. In actual fact, it's too much.
Too many, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about some of the data then and what you're talking about. And by the way, just for definition, I think one of the things that strikes me when I see your presentations and then the revenue figures is it's always you're reporting now on 2017. Or your firm numbers, you're looking, you're gathering, and that is because of the uniqueness here in Europe of when people report their numbers, right?
Yes, there is 2 things about it. As I mentioned, I get my numbers from the company registers in the different countries. Even so we are called One Europe, there is in legislation still a difference. In Germany, for example, companies can take themselves up to 12 months before they file their annual returns in the company registers. This is my problem. I have at the moment 80-85% of the revenues for Germany for 2018 already, but I'm still missing ones, and interestingly enough, it is exactly those companies who have bad results. They report the latest. Yeah, so
that makes sense.
Yeah. In Austria, for example, companies have 9 months, and I have, with the exception of one company, I have all the revenue figures.
Yeah.
And in other countries, specifically in Scandinavia, they only have 6 months until they have to report the numbers. So that gives me a very good database, and my European or my country numbers are just Excel editions. Yeah, I just sum them up and I have the numbers and compare that with the previous year. I have the growth rate. So my numbers are relatively easy, and I think that is important if you do market research. Numbers need to be easily explained. If you cannot explain a number easily, you're probably rolling the dice. Yeah. So that is the thing, and I have just published the numbers for the UK.
Yep.
On my LinkedIn homepage. You can, or my profile there. I'm constantly reporting numbers there. I'm
or on EMSNOW you can.
Exactly. I was just going to say that I'm sending the numbers to EMSNOW, so you should watch regularly on EMSNOW whether there are new news about Europe, because it's very helpful.
Now let's talk about the numbers. So your forecast, as you provided it here, is for growth. There was growth 2017 to 18, and you're expecting more growth, and you even gave a bit of a forecast looking forward. Why don't you speak to that?
Well, in actual fact, 2018 more or less is finished now, and we have seen a tremendous growth in Europe of 9.1%, which was based on incredible growth in Eastern Europe of 15.1%. Now, this growth is thanks to Donald Trump. Thank you, Donald. Because there is one thing which people don't like at all. It is unpredictability. Managers are like shy deer. They need very predictable market situations. And if all of a sudden a trade war arises with a lot of uncertainties what's going to happen in regards to tariffs, it will cause management to rethink and change the manufacturing geographics. And we are seeing that at the moment. Big companies like, for example, ODM Wistron, who is doing all the laptops, notebooks for other companies. They have in Europe they have a company in Brunn in Czechia, and they in 2017 did 357 million euros in revenues in Czechia. Now in 2018 they shifted a lot of product from the Far East over to Czechia and reported revenues of 1.105 billion. Yeah? The same we see with Foxconn, for example, in Pardubice. They had an increase of revenues of 8.4%. And that is not, if you look at Foxconn, they manufacture, for example, all the products for Hewlett-Packard. It's not that the market grew by 8.4% in regards to Hewlett-Packard products. It's just that more products were shifted from the Far East to Europe for manufacturing. Yeah? And that is a big advantage we are having at the moment. Eastern Europe definitely, in regards to labor cost, can meanwhile compete against, for example, southern China, Shenzhen, and so on. So it is becoming more attractive for the global EMS as well to shift production over to Eastern Europe.
So the biggest players, EMS in Europe, tend to be the big global ones. So those are the Foxconn, the Flex, the Jabil, those,
yes,
right?
Yes. If you look at the top five, yeah, there is the biggest one is Foxconn with a market share of 17.7%
of the European market.
European market, yeah. Followed by Flex. Number 3 is Jabil. Number 4 is the first European one, which is Zollner Electronic, which is a solid European base. And very new on number 5 is Wistron now, which with this 1.105 billion in revenues became a bigger player than Astioflash, the French EMS manufacturer.
And that's interesting because you also spoke in your presentation about what we always called regionalization, build in region for region, and that tends to be, people are building in Europe for Europe. You have the lower cost traditional Eastern European versus Western European. You still reflect that. And if I remember correctly, Eastern Europe, by revenue, the size is a bit larger than Western, as you define it currently.
It's roughly speaking, it's at the moment 20.5 billion in Eastern Europe, and it was 19.9 billion in Western Europe.
Yeah. So roughly, and that was for which year?
For 2018.
2000, and that's roughly 40 billion. For the
billion in revenues, and as I said, once I am finished with the French market, it might be 41 billion.
Okay. And now, then you're looking forward too. So you expect. Oh, by the way, what was the growth rate on that from the year before? Was that the 6? Was that?
No, it was actually much lower because in 2018 we saw in 2017, we saw nearly no revenue growth for the big three, Foxconn, Jabil, Flex, yeah, and then all of a sudden in 2018 they picked up, yeah. I have no explanation for it at the moment, and in the past I only did the research looking backwards. It takes a certain time and experience to be able to make forward-looking predictions from the numbers you have. But if you don't have accurate numbers from the past, I'm pretty much sure you cannot accurately predict the future. So that is very important. And yes, I now make predictions for the future, and I make predictions up to 2022, and we are talking about 4.7 to 5% each year. Yeah. So looking at all these discussions about a potential recession, looking at people talking about the purchasing managers index in Europe still declining, forget about it in the EMS industry. The EMS industry is different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Speak to that, please, because I know you are very big part, and that's how you ended your speech earlier, was about the recession that a lot of people are talking about, a lot of concerns, well-grounded concerns for the overall economy, but you speak specifically to the EMS industry, and your message essentially was, ignore that, there's no recession in the EMS industry in Europe, and then you always said, for now.
Yes. Well, let me give you the example in regards to the automotive industry. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of talk about the automotive industry being in a recession. Big companies like Bosch, Continental, they talk about laying off people, Bosch more than 1,000. I've had calls from companies supplying the automotive industry who said we are thinking of shutting a factory because we have no capacity utilization. And that is the point. You have to look at the big OEMs. They need 100% capacity utilization. If they don't have that, if all of a sudden the automotive industry says the building programs are going down by 15%, then they have no trigger to reduce the cost further, which means cost per unit is going up. And in such a case, they rethink strategy whether it wasn't a better thing to look for an EMS who is doing the production for them. So yes, the OEMs, they are seeing this, whatever you call, whether you call it recession or not, but the EMS industry, in actual fact, sees the opposite. There is big chances for them. Now doors are opening for them and they need to look at them, and rather than just listening to the press who says we have a recession. And by the way, if you look at the National Bureau of Economic Research and their definition of a recession, it's totally different from what we are seeing. We're seeing a decline in the industrial production at the moment, especially in the investment area. But we see no recession areas in consumer spending, in employment, in real income, and all the other criteria which the National Bureau of Economic Research mentions. Even what was called the technical recession, which meant that a technical recession was defined as 2 consecutive quarters showing a decline in gross domestic product. That didn't happen because the third quarter was a flat zero. So even from that definition, you couldn't talk about a recession. And now some economists are already rowing back, saying, "Oh no, we will not have a recession." Yeah, no, we will not have a recession. Specifically, not in the EMS industry, but we will have a lot of changes. Because, as I mentioned, if you have 75% of the companies, EMS companies in Europe, doing less than 10 million, yes, that's unhealthy. Yeah, we see much mergers and acquisition activity at the moment. I myself am looking, searching for a couple of companies for specific EMS companies to buy, and that trend will continue.
Yeah, and I caught that in your presentation. You made the comment that in 10 years, there's probably 30% of these companies on your list now won't be there, and they won't be there for they may be acquired. One they just, as businesses do, may just go out of business.
Yes. For example, if you are a bit familiar with the European industry, we have seen a new star rising on the horizon with Kartek, which is owned by Prime Pulse, and they acquired Kartek GmbH, they acquired Steka earlier this year, they acquired ETL Elektrotechnik Lauter, and just 3 weeks ago they had the closing on the purchase of Bebro and eMotion, and that made them the number 2 company in Germany, and it made them the number 7 company on the European picture. And I promise you, they will shortly be among the top 50 on the global scale, because they are not ending. They have a very specific program. They have a very professional manager who is running this business and who knows exactly his goals and what he's going to do. Right. And therefore, for me, that is important to watch that very closely.
Yeah, and we'll have the pleasure of speaking with him later today, you and I, and be able to have some of these discussions at a higher level. Our time is up. I could probably speak to you for hours, and
oh yes,
and so we'll spare that. Let me just say to the audience, as an ex-market research person myself, and that was how I started, I have great respect for the services that you provide, what you do. I used to say that market research is part hard science, part voodoo magic, right? And the hard science part is the numbers. The forecasting becomes kind of the voodoo magic part. Your hard science part is unquestionably rock solid and a great service to this industry. So keep doing it and keep reporting on it, and we'll keep reporting on it as well.
Thank you, Eric. And if you want to know more about my business, you just need to go to in4ma.de, and you will find all the important information about the European EMS industry. Thank you very much, Eric.
Thank you very much.